Continue.
We have participants. Yay.
Hello, Internet.
Hello to the Internet. Are we drinking water? Tea?
I'm a water guy.
All right.
Hello. Welcome to How Contemporary Fears Shape Your Apocalyptic Fiction, which for me now includes my computer blowing out 1 minute before game time. So I am now the invisible man, but I'm still your moderator. Thank you to iPhones for being there when you need them. So a couple of game rules. For questions, we will be doing Q&A. So there's a Q&A feature here. So please put your questions in Q&A and your comments in chat. We may not be able to see all the comments, but I'm certainly going to be looking at the Q&A questions in about 30 minutes to add to what we're discussing. And on behalf of Balticon, please remember they really would appreciate donations toward this event. So check their website and use that BISFIS link to consider making a donation. Also, after we finish, we will continue talking on Discord. I believe we'll be using the literary channel for chat afterward. Any of the panelists who can be there will join afterward. I will also be on my channel, Aire, in the chat for Dealer's Room. Okay, so again, I'm going to have everyone now introduce themselves. I am your moderator, Aire. I write science fiction and fantasy and quite a bit about apocalypses. And I'm the author of 19 books, an indie author, and we will now call on Kelly to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Dwyer. You can find me online at Devious Dwyer. My pronouns are she, her, and I write short fiction. I am also an independent bookseller at One More Page Books in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm the coordinator of Nova Teen Book Festival, the Northern Virginia's largest young adult book festival that should happen in March. Did not happen in March of this year, but I'm very much looking forward to having it happen next year in March.
John, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John Wiswell. I'm a writer and story critic. I'm mostly a short story writer. I've certainly written a few apocalypses, the occasional kaiju apocalypse, the occasional angry gay skeleton apocalypse. My pronouns are he, him, and I feel like there isn't a month when I don't read about an apocalypse. I'm very happy to join for the conversation today.
Hildy.
Hey, I'm Hildy Silverman. Pronouns are she, her. My work is primarily short fiction. It appears in anthologies, science fiction, fantasy, horror, mystery, all kinds of things. The latest of which is in the dystopian States of America. A book of, well, surprise, dystopian fiction actually was put together before all of this. So the timing is coincidental. All proceeds from that book are going to the ACLU, by the way. And for 12 years, I was also the publisher of Space and Time magazine, which is a magazine of fantasy, horror, and science fiction. And I'm happy to say continues on today under new management. So you can still submit to that. It's still out there.
Okay, so I'd like to go to the first question. I am a bit challenged on my iPhone. I'm only seeing one panelist at a time, so I may have to call on people. So the first question is, how have the terrors of the different eras shaped stories of the end of time? Who'd like to take that one?
I can jump in a little bit.
Okay.
You know, I think one of the biggest shifts that we saw in science fiction and fantasy literature occurred after World War II and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And, you know, that was around the time that the Doomsday Clock was created, and modern society suddenly found themselves living under the threat of just total and complete annihilation at any moment. And then also the deep and existential ongoing threats of nuclear fallout and mutually assured destruction as we moved into the Cold War. But I think we started seeing the vast majority of apocalyptic fiction dealing with things like kaiju and dealing with things like alien invasions, starting in post-World War II. And that was a massive shift in the way that we looked at science fiction and fantasy literature as a whole.
Okay. Hildy, can you take the question from there?
Yeah, I was thinking of the same sort of thing, that the advent of nuclear war obviously had a huge influence. Before that, I think, I'm trying to think of apocalyptic fiction before the threat of nuclear war.
It existed. It definitely
did exist. I am totally blanking on
War of the Worlds, 1938.
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go. Yeah.
Well, and Mary Shelley wrote The Last Man in the early 1800s. It's
Right.
been, but also if you think about it, apocalyptic fiction or mythologies have been part of eschatology studies from religious perspectives from the beginning of the concept of religion. What happens to us at the end times is such a fundamental aspect of humanity and religion.
Yeah, and I guess more was based on, now you mentioned, it would have been more based on the biblical, revelations and the end times based
Noah's Ark.
Yes.
And
yeah.
also the parallel in the Quran has a flooding parable as well.
Yeah, everyone has a flood. They're very popular.
Okay, John, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, so as we move into the nuclear age, we also see the themes of mass consumption and digitization, so that we get more technology-based apocalypses that aren't merely nuclear, that robots or automation will rise up or change or destroy much of the culture we exist. And also fears about chemicals being put into water and into food wind up seriously influencing the waves of zombie cinema. And the idea that the chemicals that we produce will wind up infecting and changing us such that we destroy what we love today. So those are massive changes, just like within my lifetime in the kinds of apocalypses that we look at.
And along the lines of what you're saying, I've been thinking Soylent Green and a whole bunch of different pieces that weren't nuclear apocalypses. I'm even thinking of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine.
Which was an apocalypse. It absolutely was, yeah.
So my next question for the panel is, how do different ways of portraying these apocalyptic fears affect their perspective and stories? Kelly, can you start us on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the different ways of portraying apocalypses, I mean, that's an interesting one to adjust to, because much of apocalyptic fiction deals with sort of the intimacy of an immediate apocalyptic experience for a single person, and it tends to take the vast, overwhelming global scale of destruction and shrink it down to more identifiable themes of survival and the search for safety and things like that. It almost makes it easily consumable from an I keep saying intimate, but a closed viewpoint. Though we know that there's a zombie apocalypse happening, or aliens are invading, or there's a plague around us, we're following one or a group of people. And those portrayals are, I think, crucial to understanding broader themes in apocalyptic fiction when you follow that single group along their trials and tribulations.
Okay. Hildy, you want to take it from there too?
Yeah, I agree that it works better. My personal taste is toward when you have a more intimate story set within the apocalypse. So maybe the story isn't about the apocalypse itself, but about the family struggling to survive, like what we saw in A Quiet Place.
Oh, yeah.
Shows like that where you relate to the people, and yeah, there's all these horrible things going on around them and it's affecting them, but it's their story that draws you in. And that's actually how, when I write apocalyptic fiction, that tends to be what I do. I focus on the few characters and the effects on them rather than the broad picture. Not to say you can't do the broad picture well. World War Z was a very creative way to look at the big picture.
War of the Worlds as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the novel is a better space to handle the broad picture than a film. It's harder to fit in, like Max Brooks's 30, 35 points of view would be very difficult to fit into a 90 or 120 minute runtime.
Yeah.
When I fantasize. Sorry?
As we saw.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yes, exactly. And they boiled it down to one point of view that wasn't even in the book. So apparently it's very difficult to adapt. Then there's, I think about the almost picaresque of Meg Elison's The Book of the Unnamed Midwife, which is a viral fever that is killing women going into childbirth and making reproduction almost impossible. But the idea of the theme isn't just that's bad, but specifically what does it do to systemic misogyny? How does it expand? And that the intersection of potentially being male passing and what does that allow you to do? And then also her, the unnamed midwife, who is capable of male passing, going from camp to camp and getting another taste of different women's experiences of this catastrophe. And so I think a huge element of where theme and portrayal intersect is who do you want to focus on within the theme you find interesting. Similarly, like Naomi Alderman's The Power, like looking at a complete cultural shift because this thing has changed in the biology and changed the physical dimorphism of two of the sexes of humanity.
Okay, so my next question revolves around what apocalyptic stories grabbed you and inspired you. You know, for me, when I saw Planet of the Apes, that story just took me by the throat, and I was a kid then, you know, and I've never forgotten that movie. And then I went and read the book, which I liked the movie more than the book, but they both had the same point. So what apocalyptic stories grabbed you and inspired you? John, let's start with you first.
Okay, and like one fairly popular one is Stephen King's The Stand. And the thing that inspired me the most was after the long period of loss, and once everybody has surrounded Mother Abigail and begun to build, the thing that inspired me was seeing these people who had suffered individually within their own narratives coming together to try to repair some of the damage that had been done and create group safety, which is something I still feel is not common enough in apocalyptic fiction. The idea of like, how do we support each other? What are the strengths that we have that we can share? Similarly, Walter Miller's Canticle for Leibowitz, which is like a far, far post-apocalyptic apocalyptic novel where the nuclear apocalypse has happened and the last shred, and that caused the general populace to become so anti-science that most of systemic knowledge has been destroyed. And it is being preserved within this one weirdo, almost cult of monks that feel like this knowledge from the old world is sacred and must be preserved. And what that winds up doing is creating one of the most complex visions of religion in a disaster zone that I've ever seen, because it's not just anti-religious people bad, religious people good. It's like, is it right to move the crucifix from here to put in a light so that we can study at night? It's these different kinds of religious conflicts that differ from person to person and dogma to dogma. And it's about and then as they do expand knowledge, what does the restoration of knowledge do to the people who are alive out in the world? In a world that is so superstitious because so much of science has been destroyed, that they fear this demon that's out in the desert that kills anyone it touches. It's something called fallout. And it's like, I adore that world building too. So those are two that grab me.
Okay, so Hildy, I'm going to call on you next on what stories have grabbed you and inspired you that are apocalyptic.
Two of my favorites, very different periods, but I really enjoyed I Am Legends. I love that. I've seen every movie version of it, the Omega Man, whatever.
1955.
Yes, none of which do justice to the original, which I just adore. At that time when I read it, I was much younger, so that twist at the end, that really blew my mind at the time. Like, oh my God, he's the bad guy. Spoiler alert. The other one
was so awesome.
Yes. The other one is much more, well, I guess it's not as recent anymore. In my timeline, it is Swan Song by Robert McCammon, which I actually love much more than no offense to The Stand and Stephen King, but I enjoy Swan Song more. I read it while as an adult, I had to get my tonsils out. It's a horrible recovery, by the way, when that happens. It's not like when you're a kid. So for weeks I was laid up. And I plowed through that book, and oh my God, what a world building, character building, all of it just blew my mind. The ideas of basically, you know, I don't want to give anything away on that one, but suffice it to say, how you are inside becomes revealed on your outside in a very creative way. And that one was a big one for me.
Okay, Kelly.
Well, I'm going to take a movie, if that's all right. That's, I don't think, based on fiction, which was, I watched back-to-back in high school and film studies, La Jetée by Chris Marker, and then 12 Monkeys, the Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt movie. And I was I remember being mind blown, like that airport scene falling, and then the parallels to the original movie, and the time travel, and the atmosphere was so compelling for me. I was just addicted. But the book that really did it for me recently, not so recently, but was Paolo Bacigalupi's Windup Girl. And it was the levels of, rampant disease and famine and pestilence and climate change and technology and everything synthesized into this picture of a world that was so terrifying and gripping and visceral that I couldn't put it down. I keep coming back to it as a touch point of one of the most unique and interesting books I have ever read about a future apocalyptic world.
Okay, so as I go into the next question, the question of why these stories are important comes to me, and inspire. I mean, I keep watching Logan's Run every few years and asking myself a whole slew of questions like, why is most everyone white who survived in the Chesapeake Bay area, right? And I'm living in the Chesapeake Bay area now, and it's just making me think more of Logan's Run and how that future might play out. And what I don't like about, what they were kind of portraying versus what the reality of the book would have been. So my question to the panel is, why are these apocalyptic stories so important?
I have an idea.
John, go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, at this point, they're important because they are ubiquitous. They are ingrained in our culture. It's not something that's novel anymore. We've had them long enough that there's a cultural load to them. So there's an importance to someone like Rebecca Roanhorse getting to write an indigenous person's perspective on the apocalypse in something like Trail of Lightning. We need to have responses to something that exists now for decades in the canon. So like that, and that addresses directly your issue with Logan's Run, is now we have people of color who are writing their own apocalyptic stories about what it would be like to live through it or generations after. So one thing that's important is seeing inclusion correct historic erasure within the genre.
Well, and if I can jump on that, our apocalyptic fiction that are the European, specifically American apocalyptic fiction that we have in our past is 100% imperialist and colonialist influenced. It's all about aliens coming to take over our world, and it also includes an enormous amount of othering of the villains, whether they're zombies or aliens or a plague or the things, body horror and what it does. It's about literally turning another human being into a mindless, soulless thing. And we have an opportunity now with apocalyptic fiction to move completely beyond into post-colonialism and actually show what John was saying in the beginning, the cooperative nature of humanity and how we face these plagues and zombies and whatever they may be, with less of an apocalyptic despair and more of a hope. I don't know if that's possible, and it's not quite addressing your topic, but it's incredibly important to recognize the history. Even Orson Welles was talking about colonialism in War of the Worlds, and you know, it's so directly abusive sometimes to go back and read those, and we need to acknowledge that.
Hildy.
Yeah, I think going to the question as far as why apocalyptic fiction, I think if you can identify your fears, at least I'll put this on my little writer hat and say this, if you can identify your fears and put them down in paper in a way it makes them manageable, controllable. I mean, not really, but it gives you that illusion. Like if I can think of this horrible thing and how it would be handled, well, then I guess it wouldn't be as horrible because now I know what to do, or it won't take me by surprise. You know, I came up with this way that this awful thing will end us. And so it won't shock me. I'll be ready. I think it's kind of the stories we tell ourselves, whistling past the graveyard to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also things could always be worse. You know, it's an entertainment factor as well. Like post World War I and post 20s into the 30s, when we started getting amazing stories and Flash Gordon and John Campbell was publishing, and you know, that was when War of the Worlds came out. This was a huge aspect of entertainment for a group of people, well, the entire country. I was in a deep and horrific depression. And so these concepts of these stories were entertaining even to people who were living their very worst lives in the worst possible circumstances that anyone could imagine. Here we are as science fiction writers imagining an apocalypse beyond that.
Right. So the current state is not as bad. It could be this.
Could be worse.
Aliens, you know, yeah.
That's terrible, but it's, you know, partly true for our entertainment value. We are sort of masochistic about it, I suppose. Our entertainment.
They are the highest, or not highest stakes, but direst stakes stories.
Yeah.
Like, because there's the suggestion that almost everything will fall away. And they reflect, a lot of the time, they reflect real lived experiences. Because, like, plagues are real. That there are catastrophic earthquakes, tsunamis, terrible hurricanes, climate change are all very real. And sometimes our apocalyptic fiction lets us look at that literally, and sometimes it lets us, as science fiction and fantasy have often done, lets us look at it through a metaphorical lens. A kaiju is safer than making a film, like that Godzilla film made in 1954.
Yes.
During American occupation of Japan, it was much easier for the Japanese to make that movie than make a movie about how terrible it is that the Americans are here, when they're looking over your shoulder and you have to pass their white police to get to the lot.
So the last of the questions I've written out before we go to Q&A, and I'm going to ask the panelists to help me with the Q&A side questions, because my iPhone doesn't let me see the Q&A. I can only see the chat.
That's okay. We got you, DH.
Yeah.
Okay. So my last of my official questions is, which apocalyptic stories have you really hated?
Hated.
Wow. Anything where toxic masculinity and militarization are the solution to the problem.
Oh, yeah.
I hate it when an apocalypse is an excuse for misogyny and violence against women and rape, and the prepper narrative suddenly becomes this, you know, the absolute perfect reason why everyone's going to survive. I can't stand it. It's old. Stop doing that. It's just feeding toxic masculinity and excuses to buy weaponry and fortify themselves and treat women poorly.
John, do you have something to say along those lines?
Along the lines of post-apocalyptic fiction that I hate, I'll say that within post-apocalyptic fiction, a trope that I cannot abide is, here's a ready-made post-apocalyptic culture. They all banded together already, and there's probably one jerk, one Transformers equivalent Starscream among them, who nobody deals with, who nobody sits down and goes like, look, if you keep doing this, we're all going to die. Nobody deals with them. Nobody deals with dissent. And in the end, it all falls apart, and like one guy, one girl, and a baby are the only things left alive. Like, I just detest, this is a worthless approach to apocalyptic storytelling. What are you giving to me? As an audience member, what is interesting about the human condition in things could fall apart so badly that everybody turns on each other and everybody dies, especially given that historically that's not the case. That's not what a lot of humans have done, human systems have done under the worst of duress. So that's a thing that will turn me on a story. I don't want to spoil it, but there was a movie recently I had very high hopes for that did this, and I feel like that's the ultimate spoiler.
Oh no.
So I can't say it, but I was so mad. I was so disappointed because there's
Share
a lot
it
of
in the after
potential.
chat.
Yes.
Discord. We'll totally spill the tea in Discord.
Yes, yes. On Discord we will talk.
Hey, Hildy.
I mean, both of you, spot on those. I'll throw in, I hate a Deus Ex Machina.
Oh.
I hate when a literal God shows up. First of all, I'm throwing my shoe through the TV or whatever, if that happens. And yes, we've all seen that happen. Or, just something that just hasn't been addressed. Like, wait a minute, we didn't think that, the one that's leaping to mind right now, I don't know if it's Deus Ex Machina, but I just freaking hated the ending so much I got to mention it. Signs by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh.
That movie actually made me angry. Like the ending of that, like, really? What? We're just gonna throw water on things and we're solved, problem solved. No, that's stupid. This is a stupid ending. So I don't
Hildy,
like.
we'll accept giving the aliens colds.
Oh my God. Well, I will give that one a pass because of the time it was written. That was the way things were. Okay, I'll give them the cold, but I hate to see it now.
Yeah.
And I really hate when something that it's just not earned. They pull something out of the air and, oh, magic, it fixed everything. We're all back to normal, la, la, la.
It
Although
would
I
have been a
would
good
like
ending
to
for
see
a
it in real
comedy.
life.
I'm sorry. I just want to say the Signs ending would have been a great ending for a comedy. It's like, oh, the aliens invaded the only planet in the star system that's literally covered in the thing that kills them and they didn't notice. Would be great for like Edgar Wright's Signs.
Yes. Yes, I want to see Mystery Science Theater 3000 do that movie.
Do Signs.
I want to live riff that so much.
DH, did you want me to read out some questions?
Yeah, let's do the first Q&A question.
All right, this is from James Thomas. Obvious question, but which novels have come closest to forecasting the current situation? Sarah Pinsker's Song for a New Day.
Yeah.
It's extremely prescient and very eerily done, and published far before this. Well, not far.
Wasn't there oh gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name. There's a horror writer who wrote virtually this story that it stemmed from bats or something, and
Well, there's
Contagion.
The Contagion. There's also
Yeah.
Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which it starts with an actual pandemic spreading, and then moves beyond it. And though it deals with the themes of the pandemic, it's also about other things.
Yeah, I think Max Brooks's World War Z has multiple points of view of cultures that don't believe information that are coming from outside, and that factioning of information is something that keeps getting discussed and reasonably discussed online as feeling prescient.
Okay. Kelly, let's go to the next question on that list.
Okay, this is from Ethan Handelman. Could the panelists talk about the role of hope and human action in apocalyptic fiction? For instance, Canticle for Leibowitz ends grimly, despite having hopeful themes throughout tied to the efforts of people. War of the Worlds just ends with sudden relief without much human action. Can we save ourselves?
Can we? I'm trying to think of any apocalyptic fiction that actually has that sort of
young adult fiction, and that was something I wanted to bring up. Young adult fiction, specifically dystopian and apocalyptic fiction, deals with the most extraordinary themes of hope and individual responsibility and action, and changing up the world order and changing, throwing off the expectations of the previous society and the elders, and they do so almost always in a hopeful way.
I guess Hunger Games, right?
Hunger Games, Divergent, City of Ember. remember Scott Westerfield's Uglies, Pretties specials. There's, you know, young adult fiction is just, it's native in dystopian settings because there's inherently a world order that needs to be overthrown that is oppressing young adults in that very impressionable, emotional, changeable time of their lives in which action is the only thing that solves the problem. And so you've got a great plot and a great setting and an antagonist, and it's almost always hopeful at the end.
The aforementioned, one of my favorite swan song, actually, it definitely ends on it goes in a hopeful direction as based on humans getting their shit together or what humans are left. So yeah, that's one.
Yeah. There's an indie film starring Peter Dinklage called I Think We Are Alone Now, where Peter Dinklage is the last man on Earth, and it has its bitterness. Other survivors do wind up showing up, but it's a post-viral apocalypse, and he is just caring for his little town as the only person left alive in it, and seems largely perfectly content. And it's a different kind of last man on Earth story because he's okay with it. In fact, when other survivors show up, they're like, aren't you lonely here? He's like, you know when I was lonely here? When 4,000 other people lived here.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of the story, it speaks to what it's like to be an introvert after the apocalypse. And also, when the world is thinned out in that sort of apocalyptic contrivance, what it means to step away, intentionally step away from others, to make something healthier for yourself. And multiple characters make choices like that over the course of it. I wouldn't necessarily say that's hopeful so much as it's a consideration of positivity within the intimate scale of life.
I just thought of another one, Josh Mallerman's Bird Box. There's some hopefulness.
Yeah.
I was always struck by the movie adaptation of Children of Men, and this is the opposite of what you're asking, but there was something extremely depressing and upsetting, horrifically upsetting about the suicide pills that they distribute to society, and the way that it was filmed and sort of that tangible feeling of despair and hopelessness made me, I stepped away from apocalyptic fiction after watching that. It was too much. I felt like I needed more hope and collaboration and cooperation and empathy and compassion.
Also, Shaun of the Dead.
Hey!
I'm just going to be friends with the zombie. Like, just because my friend has this invasive condition that changes him doesn't mean I don't want to play Xbox.
Such a great movie.
Oh, the best movie. My eldest's name is Sean, and that was the very first movie we watched after his birth, and that is like the core movie that tells me that apocalypses can be survived.
Look, I'm a fan of Warm Bodies.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a really good one.
There's also, I haven't read it yet, but My Life is a White Trash Zombie. Is that
I haven't read that one.
I don't know. I'm just tossing it out there. I've heard it, and it's got very good reviews, and it's about living as a zombie.
Fun.
But if anybody's read it, let me know.
Okay, so let's go on to the next question on the Q&A.
This is a hard one. I'm not sure what we'll come up with here. Stephen Ryder asks, are there examples of post-colonial apocalypse fiction?
I mean, Trail of Lightning is,
Rebecca?
It's deliberately, right? Like it's the indigenous people in the United States have had their experience of marginalization, and the apocalypse hits, and it's deliberately about the survival of a reservation and indigenous people after the apocalypse. And it never forgets the history that came before it.
Yeah, and somebody just mentioned Parable of the Sower and Octavia Butler. I'll also toss in Nalo Hopkinson's Brown Girl in the Ring, which was written in the 1990s in post-apocalyptic Toronto. And I feel like it could possibly fit into that theme of post-colonialism. And Nnedi Okorafor, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but I believe that she has written some post-apocalyptic fiction as well.
Yeah, the Binti wasn't. I think that might have been, and she's written others.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and Jemison, right? The
Broken Earth.
Yeah.
Broken Earth. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So they're out there. Hopefully we'll see more.
Okay, next question on the Q&A.
The next question, how do you decide how far into the future to go with your story? Oh man, we were talking about whether or not we should approach COVID from this, and we were talking in the green room before the panel about how I just don't know how people are envisioning a world post COVID and coronavirus. Like what is our inflection point here that will, what is going to change so fundamentally that we cannot envision it? So how far in the future do we go with our apocalypses?
I tend to write near future, only because I usually like to focus on my apocalypses, apocalypti, from events I understand well or well enough or am living. That's just a personal taste. Yeah, I guess every author has their preference on that.
Yeah, every apocalyptic story I've written has been very close to the apocalypse because I was writing about characters who had baggage holding over from our time and then was talking about how it had changed. But I have a great fondness for the incredibly far future, like Adventure Time. So far in the future, you don't even realize that it's a post-apocalypse for quite a while. And like Book of the New Sun is similarly, I've ruined it now that it is a post-apocalypse, but like once you start to put together that that's what Wolf was writing, it's a delightful additional layer to what everybody in that novel is going through, or that series is going through.
And I'm not sure how far away in time A Sword for Shannara is, but that is our Earth.
Oh, that's right. That's a good, yeah, wow, I didn't think of that.
Well, and William Gibson, I'd put in there as an example of an extremely far future apocalypse. His concept of the jackpot from the peripheral is this slow moving, inevitable decline of a total collapse of all civilization that happens. All that happens together at once. And then he set his story so far into the future that there's technology, almost time travel technology called stubs, at which these people that are living in this extremely economically divided London are able to access the past as the jackpot is just starting. And so I think, there's successful ways of doing very close, intimate apocalypses and then very far portrayals of the world beyond it.
Okay, so let's go to the next question.
Okay, the next one is, do you find seeing films can become a crutch to developing your own inspirations to set your original story writing in writing narrative? No, I love watching movies. For me, consuming media it's like everything you consume as a writer gets put in a blender. Somebody's already made this metaphor, it's not me, but it blends and blends and blends, and what comes out is my own very unique blurpy smoothie. So I love watching movies set in apocalypses. I might take one or two small things here or there to incorporate later, but it's my flavor and my writing and my originality. It doesn't impact me too much. If you're worried that it's impacting you too much, stop. A lot of people can't read or watch media while they're writing something very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy watching. I'm a big zombie fan. I've watched, Walking Dead. I'm all about it. All of those. The only time I would say, or I hope, we all hope we're not subconsciously putting things in our writing that we took from somewhere else. But the only thing that I would say is a big influence is if I watch a movie and I don't like the way they ended it. I don't like what they did with it.
Fan fiction is there for you, Hildy.
Oh, there you go. So, I might see that and say, wow, that was dumb. They could have done that better. And maybe that will help me noodle up my own story. Not the same one, but something else that would end it in a way that I think would be more satisfying.
I would just share that C.J. Sherry started writing because Flash Gordon went off the air, and she was a kid, and she didn't want the story to end, but she knew that she couldn't plagiarize because her mattress said something about, you can't cheat, on calling things by the mattress name. So she started writing her own Flash Gordon stories, but she decided that if Flash did it, she had to do the opposite. So no one could tell that they were inspired by Flash. So, but I thought for C.J. Sherry to be as prolific as she is and to start out inspired by Flash Gordon, we can be inspired by anything.
Absolutely.
And then
So
I
what's the
also
next
want to
question on the
know.
list?
Sorry. I also want to know what the rest of the world is already getting when I am writing something to offer to the world. I don't want to sit by myself and not consume what other people are consuming, because it's what we're doing is we're adding to a culture. It's worthwhile knowing at least some of what the rest of the culture is and what everybody else is getting. Because that often shows me what I'm really missing, what I would really like to exist. So I consume a lot. Usually when if I'm in a period of really high productivity, sure, I don't consume a lot, because the rest of my day I'd really like to go be with my family or something. But when I'm not producing several thousand words a day, I'm definitely reading and watching.
Next
Okay,
one.
the next question. Yeah.
All right. The next question is, how critical is it to tie near future stories to a progression from current day to that point? Can focusing on characters instead of the hows and whys that don't have a bearing on the story anymore help?
A really good question.
It's kind of like the question about the alternate, how people write alternate history is your point of divergence. How obsessive are you going to be over where your point of divergence is, really? This is a tough one. I feel like if you are setting a story in the near future and something is different, there needs to be a reason why it's different. And it may not be something that you include in your story, but you as a writer need to know it. And that functionally should impact the behaviors and societal structures and, new cultural mythologies. Even if this is very close near future, things will have changed if you were changing something relatively drastic. And your reader is going to have cognitive dissonance enough that you are either going to need to make that your unique point of cognitive dissonance, the things that are different, but don't overwhelm them so much with everything shifting into the near future without explaining it. And that is not just a function of character, that's a function of plot and environment.
Yeah, I think it depends on your world building and what you're attempting to build. Is your focus on the world itself, the technology of that world, and less on what the characters are actually doing? Is it that kind of a story? Or is your focus the development of the characters and how they grow and learn and are influenced by your world? I would say, again, personal preference when writing is to focus on the characters. I'm not one to, to over-focus on the environment and such. So I would say bringing in whatever advanced technology or changes that are relevant to the characters and developing them the way I want. So I might not focus too much on this communication device and how it works specifically and all the intricacies and how it was developed and it stemmed from this, because that's not the point. I just need that device, and my characters who exist in this world would know where it came from. They know they used the device. They don't need all that extra information.
Yeah, I think Kelly basically nailed it for me. It's being deliberate about what's different. I struggle to think of a story that's outlandish, that it has outrageous changes that don't attract the audience's attention. Like, either you're going to attract the audience's attention because it seems ridiculous, and hopefully it's more of a comedic thing, like that Canadian movie, The Turbo Kid, where you're like, well, how on earth did they get to this apocalypse? It's like some weird. It's almost like if a Saturday morning cartoon was real, but also the apocalypse. Like, it makes no sense, but it's attracting your attention to that and making it absurd and telling you this apocalypse is more fun. This is more of a silly apocalypse. If it's a more serious thing and you're not explaining it to the audience, you need to be deliberate to why the audience doesn't get to know. And that should be the justification in itself, if not the explanation.
Next question.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, I love this one. What movies or TV series currently on Netflix or Amazon Prime in this genre do you recommend?
Okay. The Korean show Kingdom.
Oh, yes.
Which is currently 2 seasons long. I mean, it's not a true apocalypse because, it happened hundreds of years ago and allegedly we're all still here. So probably it's not. But like it's a zombie outbreak in medieval Korea, and you've got your Game of Thrones jockeying or vying for who will be in political power. But that's all also under the pressure of there's this encroaching undead horde. The choreography is great. The acting is great. The hats are amazing. The best in class hats for certain. And the 2 seasons are each 6 episodes, so you can get through it relatively quickly. I think it's certainly one of my favorite zombie things I've ever seen, and an especially great long-form show.
I'll jump in with Kepo and the Age of Wonder Beasts on Netflix, which is an animated series. It is a post-apocalypse, and there are cave dwellers under ruined cities, and on the surface there are mutant creatures, insects, snakes, things, and also other humans. And it is so charming. If you're talking about looking for hope in an apocalypse, the character of Kepo is the most upbeat, charming. It's not Mary Sue, but extremely well written, queer friendly, lovely animated, and incredible music. I'd highly recommend it to anyone. Ooh, that's our 5-minute warning.
Ooh. Well, I gotta confess that I'm not watching any apocalyptic fiction right now. I mean, when Walking Dead comes back on, I think it's got to be next year because they couldn't finish their finale because of the real apocalypse. Ironic. Yeah, I'm not picking up anything else. I just don't have it in me. I'm not
Hildy?
feeling it.
Hildy, what I've been watching, binge watching, is Handmaid's Tale.
Oh God!
Oh my gosh, that's
I
deep.
couldn't touch that.
Ouch.
But that's definitely apocalyptic.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Can I make one more recommendation that's more upbeat than Handmaid's Tale?
Doesn't take much.
Right, literally anything. But also, the Japanese movie One Cut of the Dead, which is on Shudder for free, and you can rent it for very cheap. It is a wonderful, it's a wacky film in which a hack director wants to make a zombie film all in one take, all in one cut, because those are all the rage. And in the middle of his attempting to film his zombie film with a crew that's never been in a film before, real zombies attack the set. And this poor crew who have been like, I think Kepo would work really well to defend ourselves, are like, oh, I really hope it works. And like they're trying to do the Kepo that they were training in before they did the shooting. And if you can possibly not learn anything more about the film, you will be so delighted with the absurd places this delightful film goes. It's called
Okay,
One
that
Cut
sounds like
of the
fun.
Dead.
Oh my gosh, that sounds fabulous.
I gotta look that up.
Okay, so since we've had our 5-minute warning, and I want to give everyone the opportunity to say final remarks, let's do that at this point. Kelly, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you so much. This was delightful. I had a great time. You can find me online at Devious Dwyer or deviousdwyer.com. That's it from me.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for attending. You know, it's great to keep Balticon going even virtually. So I'm always very happy to see so many people participating and joining in for these panels and everything else going on. Because Balticon I love, near and dear to my heart. So yeah, keep it going, team. And everyone just stay safe and hang on. We'll get through our own apocalypse here. We'll come out the other side. It will happen.
Yeah, DH, I want to thank you for moderating, and Kelly for co-moderating. Like we overcame COVID and technical difficulties all in one morning. We are now in the post-apocalypse. You can find.
I'm running out of computers.
That's your apocalypse.
At Wiswell on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I think I'm like johnwiswell.3 or something in their system. I have a blog that lists all of my stories and essays at johnwiswell.blogspot.com. And I hope everybody enjoyed the panel. Thank you so much for having me.
And you can find me, I'm DH Aire, your moderator, at dhair.net. And a number of the panelists will be going to Discord to follow up. So if you go to the literary chat in Discord, you can continue the discussion of today's panel. And I want to thank everyone for being just so wonderful, panelists and audience with questions. You've made this a wonderful panel to be with you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Good luck
Bye.
with your computer, DH.
Yeah, I got to figure out what's going on next.
Good luck.
Okay, bye.